In this week's Bizline, startups having a hard time accessing capital and measures suggested to boost startups' access to capital. Welcome to Bizline, a business talk show on VTV International, where we explore the latest trends and developments in Vietnam economic scene. I'm your host, Hoàng Hằng. The recent significant growth rate of startup firms in Vietnam has made the sector more attractive to domestic and foreign investors. However, most startups are categorized as small and micro-sized enterprises. Some are simply groups of individuals developing innovative ideas. As a result, startups have limited equity and financial capacity. They also lack collateral and ownership of assets. This makes it very difficult for startups to meet the conditions to access capital from credit institutions. What difficulties are startups facing in their journey to access capital, and what policies have been applied to help the creative startup sector overcome these challenges? These are the main topics of this week's Bizline. But first, let's find out more about the capital difficulties startup firms face in the following story.
This startup has now put into operation 2 international standard production facilities in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. To further expand production, the enterprise needs to mobilize capital from investment funds. However, this is challenging due to the lack of a necessary information network on the capital allocation process for startups.
Các doanh nghiệp thì thiếu tất cả mọi thứ này, thiếu kinh nghiệm này, thiếu nguồn vốn, thiếu kỹ năng quản lý. Còn các quỹ thì họ lại có tất cả mọi thứ đấy. Nên khoảng cách giữa doanh nghiệp và các quỹ nó khá là lớn, tiếp cận một thế khá là bị động. Mình không biết là sẽ phải chuẩn bị cái quy trình hoặc là các bước như thế nào để có thể sâu ra được cái năng lực thực tế của cái dự án cũng như là của cái doanh nghiệp của mình.
They don't know why they have to present a business plan. They don't understand why a due diligence is asking access to all the contracts, the labor contract, the client contract, the financials, why there is an audit needed. So actually there is a gap between knowledge and expectation, both in terms of local circumstances and like in terms of like being able to ready to do such an investment.
Most startups are categorized as small and micro-sized enterprises. Some are simply groups of individuals developing innovative ideas. As a result, startups have limited equity and financial capacity. They also lack collateral and ownership of assets.
I've seen another business. They were looking for capital for a new school project, which a lot of money. They wanted to raise like $40 million. And I was asking basics like, okay, I understand you need $40 million, but how much money you will make? What is the return on investment for the investors? How many years later the investor can get the money back? And they just told me that, but we have the land. But a foreign investor is asking like, okay, you have the land is good, but how I will get the money back?
Accessing capital the first time is difficult. Subsequent attempts are even more difficult. It's difficult for startups to maintain the status of capital use and for them to prove their financial capacity for the next attempts for funding.
Đối với cả các công ty khởi nghiệp ấy, công ty startup ấy, thì đầu tiên họ huy động nguồn vốn là từ chính cá nhân họ huy động thôi. Thứ hai nữa là từ một số người thân thôi. Thế còn có một cái kênh mà các doanh nghiệp thường huy động vốn là vay từ ngân hàng. Thì đối với các công ty khởi nghiệp mà vay từ ngân hàng thì rất là khó. Tại sao lại khó? Tại vì là công ty khởi nghiệp thì họ gần như là cái tài sản của họ rất là ít. Thành ra đảm bảo tài sản cho khoản vay vốn ngân hàng thì đấy là cái rất là hiếm, rất là khó.
Các quỹ người ta sẽ rất e dè khi đầu tư vào doanh nghiệp tại vì mất thời gian này, rủi ro nhiều hơn này, cái cơ sở để thẩm định các cái năng lực thực tế của doanh nghiệp nó chưa có nhiều cơ sở rõ ràng để thẩm định, nên là họ sẽ thường khá e ngại khi đầu tư vào những cái doanh nghiệp startup.
It can be seen that the aforementioned challenges are causing significant obstacle for startups in accessing loans for their operations. Joining us in the studio to discuss this issue, Ms. Nguyễn Kim Hoa, Director of Strategy, Risk and Transaction, Deloitte, Vietnam. Ms. Hoa has experience working with various stakeholders in the startup ecosystem, including global and local venture capital funds, government agencies, and early stage startups. And we'll also welcome Mr. Dương Thanh Tùng, partner of strategy, risk and transactions, who spent years working with late stage startups and support private equity funds and strategic investors in terms of valuation and due diligence on startups. Well, thank you to both of our guests. Okay, first of all, there are currently about 3,800 startups in Vietnam, of which 11 have investment capital of over 100 million US dollars, and 3 have investment capital of over 1 billion US dollars. So this shows that the potential for investment in startups in Vietnam is very promising. What do you think about this?
Vietnam has a great potential for investment in startup, right? You know that our economy in Vietnam, we have a very fast growing economy, have a large domestic market of 100 million people, and also very favorable demographic with a big and highly educated and very fascinated young people. All of this making Vietnam is a natural destination for any investment opportunity in the region as well. And actually the presence of the 3 unicorn in the startup of Vietnam, right, is demonstrate that the interest of the foreign investor, that they are willing to support the high growth, high potential business in Vietnam.
Now, Ms. Hoa, the reality shows that startups are mostly small scale and micro, and in some cases they are just groups of individuals exploring innovative ideas. So it is very difficult for them to meet the current capital access regulation. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think startup obviously is defined as businesses that have very innovative products or services that can grow very fast in a very short period of time. So intrinsically, it's very different from a small and medium-sized business, right? Small and medium-sized business, it can take years to develop, whereas startup, they can grow and scale very quickly. And as a result of that, the funding requirements for startup are very different compared to SMEs. And very often, startups, when they first start with an idea, when they have a POC or at the MVP stage, they don't generate any revenue. So the funding requirements for startups has to be very different compared to traditional financing methods. If we look at the world and the ways that startups have been funded, if we looked at America, for example, or in Europe, startup can get multiple various sources of fundings from both the public and private sector. For example, for public sector, they can get government grants. They can even get governmental seed funds for startups. They have venture capital funds, corporate venture capitals, and also venture debts. And if you look at the markets that are closer to us, for example, Singapore or Indonesia, those financing methods are also available. But if we look at closer into Vietnam, right, obviously the financing options are more limited compared to the ones that I've just described, but there are still many financing options. So obviously the founders can bootstrap or self-fund. Then they can get capital from angel investors and venture capital funds who are the most active in Vietnam at the moment.
According to the proposal of the Ministry of Finance, enterprises with total annual revenue of less than $118,000 will be subject to a corporate income tax rate of 15%. Enterprises with total annual revenue ranging from over $118,000 to less than $1.9 million will be subject to a tax rate of 17%. This tax rate does not apply to businesses that are subsidiaries or affiliated companies of businesses that are not eligible for the above policy.
Nếu với 3% hay 5% là một con số rất là quý, bởi vì là chúng tôi có thể tái tạo tiếp tục cho lực lượng lao động cũng như là đầu tư trang thiết bị, máy móc, nhà xưởng.
Currently, only about 20% of businesses have profits to pay corporate income tax. Many economic experts believe that the Ministry of Finance should expand the revenue scale so that more businesses can benefit.
Nếu mà theo quy định như thế này thì cái doanh nghiệp mà trên 50 tỷ là hầu như là không có giảm gì về thuế, đúng không ạ? Thế thì có thể là mình tăng cái số quy mô doanh thu của doanh nghiệp lên không phải là 50 tỷ mà lên 100 tỷ chẳng hạn, là được hưởng cái ưu đãi đó. Thì như vậy là cái số doanh nghiệp hưởng thuế suất nhỏ đi nó tăng lên.
On the other hand, additional support policies are needed to create real leverage for startups to accelerate their growth.
Chính sách tiếp cận về mặt bằng, các thủ tục hành chính, các cái chính sách hỗ trợ, đặc biệt là hỗ trợ cái vốn trung hạn để cho họ thực hiện cái chuyển đổi số, thực hiện cái đổi mới. Thì tất cả cái nó phải đồng bộ với nhau. Thì nó mới phát huy hết ý nghĩa của cái chính sách thuế. Để làm sao người ta kinh doanh có lời thì người ta phải nộp thuế.
Startups are a key force in Vietnam's economy. Tax reductions will help businesses accumulate capital to develop on a larger scale, thereby nurturing long-term revenue sources for the state budget.
Regarding credit capital, experts say that it is very difficult for startups and innovative businesses to use their models and ideas as collateral when borrowing from banks. So what solutions should startups explore to solve this issue?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, right, the financing options for startups are very diverse. But I think it's more in terms of the startup ability to access the funding and to get accepted to get that funding. So many Vietnamese startups, for example, they do not get access to traditional financing methods, right? But they have managed to seek financing from the sources that I mentioned before, for example, venture debts, private credit. So the funding and the dry power for startups is there. In terms of dry power, it is estimated that there's billions of dollars that are actually available in Southeast Asia to deploy. The issue is actually sourcing and finding the right startup to fund. So I think in order to get access to funding, there are three key things that startups need to focus on, and it is actually within themselves. So first of all, in terms of a realistic entry valuation. So with an early stage startup, they need to have a very realistic expectations in terms of the valuations, and they need to benchmark themselves with the startups that operate in the similar segments, similar sector, similar business model in different geographies. They need to be very realistic on that. Which brings me to the second point about a proven monetization model. Startup need to focus more on the key sustainable economic unit, making sure that there is a clear pathway to profitability.
Now, venture capital is expected to create strong driving force for startup projects, removing capital difficulties since there's no strict requirement for collateral. So what do you think about this solution?
Yes. So I think venture capital is surely a driving force for startup to develop and grow, right? They are widely available, but they are not easy money, actually. Venture capital, they may not require collateral when making investment, but they are really selected and rigorous in terms of evaluating the startup and their potential. So they are acting like a natural selection force in the revolution, right? Basically, only one that survives their scrutiny and their test can receive the fund and progress to the next phase. So in order to attract the venture capital, the quality of the startup is the key to attract this investment. And in our data, right, we have 3,500 venture capital making investment in the Southeast Asia region from 2019 to 2023. So it means that there's a lot more, fund is available in the region and ready to make investment in Vietnam. The main obstacle here is whether our startup has the capability and also investable to attract them.
Recent data shows that there are currently 210 venture capital funds investing in startups in Vietnam, nearly 40 of which are domestic. Investors and venture capital funds play an important role in providing capital for startups.
A virtual classroom. Here, teachers and students can discuss and interact without having to attend in person. Recently launched, this online education platform uses artificial intelligence and virtual reality on the metaverse. It successfully raised $100,000 in the Shark Tank Vietnam program.
Chúng tôi mong muốn tiếp cận được rất nhiều trường học, cũng như đưa ra được các cái giải pháp giáo dục tốt nhất trực tiếp đến cho người dân.
Digital technology is one of the top 3 fields attracting the most investment, with a growth rate of over 200% year on year. In Southeast Asia, Vietnam is currently leading in the number of investments and is third in the value of venture capital. This is due to several advantages, including a young population, high internet coverage, high smartphone usage rate, and significant government support in promoting digital economic growth.
Trung tâm đổi mới sáng tạo quốc gia NIC thuộc Bộ Kế hoạch Đầu tư thì ở trung tâm cũng bắt đầu có các cái chính sách để ban hành cái hành lang pháp lý và bắt đầu chuẩn bị để xây dựng cái tổ chức để hình thành cái quỹ đầu tư cho các công ty khởi nghiệp, và thậm chí là Việt Nam lại rất là nhanh nhạy để học tập những cái mô hình của nước ngoài, là cái nguồn ngân sách của nhà nước, cái quỹ đầu tư của nhà nước thì sẽ phải có cái vai trò dẫn dắt trên thị trường.
To successfully raise capital, projects must demonstrate the ability to attract a large number of users with breakthrough ideas. Projects also need to be classified into different groups: unicorn, startups, promising startups, and small and medium enterprises.
Thực sự là phải có những cái cơ quan, các cái đơn vị thực hiện cái vai trò hỗ trợ, kết nối các cái thành tố quan trọng của hệ sinh thái đổi mới sáng tạo, và đặc biệt là doanh nghiệp trong cái việc chuyển đổi số và tập trung vào một số các lĩnh vực trọng tâm của cách mạng công nghiệp 4.0.
Trong cái phát triển hệ sinh thái khởi nghiệp, tôi đặt ra một việc cho hệ sinh thái. Tất cả các bạn trẻ hãy suy nghĩ, hãy sáng tạo, hãy đưa ra những giải pháp mới để làm sao chúng ta có thể quay trở lại phát triển kinh tế.
The potential for attracting capital in the future will revolve around digital transformation activities in the healthcare, education, finance, and retail sectors. These projects will target the international market, not just the domestic one.
Now we're back to Mr. Tung. International investors are facing many difficulties when operating in a domestic startup investment market. So what is your opinion on this market?
All the frontier market, we have the problem in terms of regulation, in terms of integration, and achieving the standard. I think it's very similar. But the venture capital, they have the experience, they have the resource to address that risk to come in. And once the main driver for them to come in is the opportunity that the market can provide. And if the opportunity is large enough, all the obstacles, they can address themselves and they can solve that and enter, make the investment. And currently, I think that Vietnam have made a great effort in removing a lot of barrier for the fund to flow in.
And Ms. Hoa, would you like to add anything about the domestic startup investment market in Vietnam?
I think as anh Tung rightly mentioned, the need for very early stage support is critical for startup, because as statistics shows, 90 to 95% of startups actually failed in the early stage. So the government grants, the funds from the IDOs will become extremely important for the startup to be able to survive, to get past that testing stage and be able to commercialize their products or services.
Now, many investors still face certain difficulties in applying for investment licenses, managing investment divesting capital, transferring profits back to the country, and dealing with tax-related issues. So how do these difficulties affect the decision to invest in startups, and what solutions should be proposed?
Yeah, actually from my perspective, right, the real challenge here is not in terms of the licensing, making investment, or the operation of the venture fund in Vietnam. The real challenge here to attract the investment in Vietnam and affecting the investment decision is how they can realize the profit and also realize the return from the investment. You know that most of the investment in startup, the primary asset for them is through the IPO. In our regulation, right, to close a business actually it takes a lot of time. And this can also ruin the money from what they can recover. So this is as well an area that I think we can have a look at in terms of the framework regulation setting. The other areas I think that we can improve a lot is the tax and also the compliance issue. We have an example, very good example from Grab and Shopee and also the e-wallet, where the government has really support the startup to explore, to implement the new business model and to help them address the tax issue when it's arrived. But that was the success case. I would like to have a more formal regulation so that all the startups, they can go out to the market, test the business model without being fear of violation and being charged for something that has not been specified clearly in the regulation. And also the incentive, right? They do not receive the incentive. The startup, very small one, they have to comply with the normal compliance registration, like a big business that is really not fair for their state of operation. And also, more important thing, there are no incentive for venture capital compared to others. So all this area, if we can address this correctly, we can, make our business environment more friendly toward the startup and attract more investment activity from the foreign investor. That's the key thing, in my opinion. Yeah.
Energy transition and green hydrogen energy development in Vietnam are among the 4 priority pillars of this Korean industrial group. The group is also a pioneer in promoting innovation through cooperation with Vietnam.
저희는 지난 30년 동안 선대 회장 시절부터 베트남에 다양한 투자를 했습니다. 그리고 다양한 사회공헌 활동도 해왔습니다. 그런데 저희는 앞으로 30년 동안은 조금은 더 테마를 가지고 베트남에 투자하고 싶습니다.
The Vietnam National Innovation Center is seen by corporations as a realization of Vietnam's determination to innovate. Expected to be the core of the innovation ecosystem, this center helps create a focal point for corporations to engage more deeply in research, development, and innovation in Vietnam.
Government needs to incentivize, needs to provide the incentives to attract the investments, whether it's tax incentives, whether it's infrastructure incentives, and I know your government is right now finishing up a national semiconductor strategy. We're very encouraged by that.
In addition, investors have assessed that the quality of human resources for innovation in Vietnam is both a challenge and an advantage. Good preparation will lead to a breakthrough in this process.
Vietnam National University, Vietnam Japanese University will be relocating their campus into this product race, and many Japanese innovative companies, Nissan and Nidec, are having a factory and R&D center here.
More commitments from investors and global corporations mean better conditions for the Vietnamese innovation ecosystem. As a result, Vietnamese startups will have more opportunities to grow and mature, turning the country into a hub of innovation.
It is forecast that more domestic and foreign startups will emerge in Vietnam in the near future. So is forming a strong ecosystem where investors are willing to support startup is the key to the dynamic, innovative future. And what do you think about the future potential of attracting capital innovation into Vietnam?
Undoubtedly, startup will be the growth engine for the Vietnamese economy in the next 10 to 20 years. And the forecast shows that it is expected that Vietnam will become one of the fastest growing economy in the world to 2030. As such, our startup requires a very strong and supportive innovation ecosystem. And if we look at the innovation ecosystem that encompasses various stakeholders from the public sectors, for example, the governmental agencies, at that forefront is NIC, the MPI, the MOST, the MOF. From a private sector side is the venture capital funds and what we call a market enablers. And these market enablers play a paramount importance role in supporting startup. These encompasses the large corporations, both domestically and internationally, the incubators and accelerators funds, also the trade associations. Now, I want to zoom in the role, very important role of the large corporations in supporting startup and making sure that the funding is more accessible to startup. With large corporations, both domestically and internationally, they have the resources to help the startup in the beginning stage of their development, product development. They can help test the market or the feasibility of the product much quicker than when the startup actually have to do it themselves. So if that collaboration can be fostered and can be encouraged by favorable incentives, for example, taxes for setting up corporate venture capital funds, CVCs, within the large corporations to foster innovation and transformation, that will definitely make Vietnam the undisputed destination for startup funding.
Okay, and Mr. Tung, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, I think now the government had put the right way to promote the startup and innovation in Vietnam generally, but I think they can do more by prioritize the sector and select something that we can put our resource and also our effort in order to promote them. That will make us to become ready for the next chance, and also for all the change that happen, we can become a leader and also a very pivotal part of the value chain in this new technology-driven world. Yeah.
Okay. According to the recently released report Global Startup Ecosystem Index 2024, Vietnam jumped 2 places in the ranking. The startup ecosystem in 2024 is assessed to have achieved many successes and developments in various fields. Additionally, venture capital investments in Vietnam are growing strongly, and the preferential policies of the Vietnamese government have been attracting large foreign investment funds. It is expected that venture capital investment in Vietnam will reach $5 billion in the period from 2023 to 2025, creating a new and strong driving force for the overall development of the Vietnamese economy in the current context. And that wraps up this edition of BizLine. Stay with us for more content, or you can download our app VTV Go from App Store or Google Play for a lot more. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time.